Hello. We should probably introduce ourselves. My name's Allison Nixon. I'm the Chief Research Officer at Unit 221B. My whole career, I've been chasing script kiddies, and I try very hard to work on things that are not important, and I have failed completely.
I'm Ben Coon. I'm the Chief Intelligence Officer at Unit 221B. I just started here a little while ago and am happy to be here and honored to be on the stage with Allison.
Ben's amazing. So the comm is a subculture. It is not a group. I want to give this talk today to educate people at not necessarily a high level, but like a structural level about how does this subculture work? How does it recruit? How does it grow? And in terms of our defensive strategy, what are the things that we can do that are productive and move the situation forward rather than backward? So first I want to talk about, what is the comm, right? First of all, it's not a group. It is a culture. Within that culture, there are many specific groups. The groups don't necessarily like each other. They fight each other all the time, and they don't always coordinate with each other. So, we have to consider that this is a much messier situation than what is described as a group. What this is, it's a grassroots movement. It's a bottom-up social phenomenon. It is essentially, the criminal underground has kind of grown in size because of high-dollar fraud. And it's developed its own distinct culture of fame worshiping, fame seeking. And the text is too small there. I can't read it. Oh, yeah. So there's a lot of fame seeking going on as well. So this culture, it idolizes the most prominent members of the culture. And there's a lot of parallels and overlaps with the online culture of worshiping school shooters, where you have a person, their fame is directly correlated with how much harm they can cause and how depraved their behavior can be. So within the comm, with these hackers, with the high harm hackers that are written about in the media, there's so many parallels to that. And unfortunately, unlike school shooters who have an end point, these highly harmful hackers, they continue on sometimes for years, and they accumulate more fame, more attention, and people join the comm because these actors are allowed to continue for such a long time. Another aspect of the comm is that they all think that they're anonymous for some reason, and because they all believe that they're anonymous, they engage in riskier behavior than they otherwise would if they knew the truth. So the kind of people that are in the comm, so I'm going to talk about demographics a little bit. It's young offenders. There's a lot of people under 18. There's specific reasons why this is the case. Part of it is because, these are young people looking for a place to belong, looking for a place in the world. The other part of it is that because of the way the law is, they're much more lenient to minors. These gangs will explicitly recruit minors to do the dirty work. So part of the reason why the comm skews so young is because of this essentially legal loophole or legal situation that incentivizes people to bring children into this space. The comm is also predominantly Five Eyes countries in Europe because it's English speaking. The internet has no borders, but language is kind of a border. And when you have basically the English-speaking criminal underground, you're going to have Five Eyes countries in Europe, basically. Also, a lot of the people in the comm, they are not the stereotypical old school hacker. Like they do not embody the hacker spirit as it is understood from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, right? A lot of us in the industry make assumptions along those lines, but it's just not true. The culture has changed so much that the current state of things is not recognizable.
In a couple of minutes, we'll be touching on another slide where we'll go over about the young offenders and the high harm, and an example that we worked through in the past couple of weeks. So what does the COM do? This is a list of what they do: hacking, SIM swapping. When Alice and I were meeting up in New York to talk about this presentation, one of the things that we noticed was that I was with another company. Allison was working SIM swapping on a case. I was working the same case from another angle, and we didn't know each other or that we were working on this. And had we done that, we probably would have solved that case or at least moved that case along a lot faster. So this goes back to collaboration that the opening speaker talked about. You know, collaborate with each other, work with each other, share information to try and move this along. Social engineering, crypto theft, phishing, smishing. My previous life, I did a lot with phishing and smishing. Grooming of minors, we'll touch on that. Extortion, sextortion, swatting, kidnapping, and murder.
Yeah, we have worked on a non-zero number of murder cases. That's not great.
So this is a headline from a few weeks ago where Richmond high schools were swatted. Our team picked this up as it was taking place. They were live streaming this, and we were actually able to get on the live stream and follow this and notify FBI in real time as this was going on. It ended up being, I think, 13 or 14 schools in the Richmond, Henrico County area that were all swatted in a single phone call by a 14-year-old, what we think is a 14-year-old kid out of Manchester in the UK. What was really interesting about this was that was one of 9 swatting attacks that happened in about a 3 or 4 day period by the same individual. The result of that, one of the last swats, was they were swatting a guy while they had his girlfriend on the phone, and they were sextorting her while they were swatting him. And it was so bad that the young lady, who was a minor, ended up in the hospital because he convinced her to do self-harm. That's how serious these guys are. That's how bad this is. So as the swatting took place, some of them around this area, I can't mention because it's still in investigation, but it was bad. And at some point, you know, in the investigators that are on my team, we had to step away from it, and sometimes another person step in, just because it gets pretty bad.
Yeah, so I'm going to go over a little bit of history. So there's certain points in time over the past decade that have been major pivot points for the hacking underground. And, you know, when you trace the ancestry of these things, you can draw a straight line between the current situation and the old school hackers that we all kind of have fond nostalgic feelings towards, right? There is an ancestry, but it has changed so much since then. So I'm going to discuss some of the pivot points here. So probably the biggest, the most consequential pivot point for the hacking underground culture was 2018, when the price of Bitcoin exploded. So what happened here is it transformed the criminal underground from a scene of petty thieves and people who, you know, maybe they had monetary motivation, but the potential earnings were so low that, you know, it wasn't about the money back then. But when the price of Bitcoin exploded and all these esoteric hacking techniques that they had suddenly became a vector for making a ton of money, you know, you had these overnight millionaires. And from that point, from especially the media reporting afterwards, a lot of kids would come into this space because they had heard about all these crazy parties that these guys would throw and all this crazy money that they made and how easy it was to make the money. So from 2018, there was a population explosion in the COM. And for some reason, this is also when, you know, it used to call itself the scene. And then after 2018, it self-identified as the COM. It's strange. So for several years after that, it was kind of like the SIM swap era of the COM. For various reasons, the companies whose accounts were getting cleaned out, like they did not really fix the problem for several years. So it pumped an enormous amount of money into this space. It was literally a gold rush. And then 2020, 2021, there was, the pandemic. And what this meant was that there was this huge influx of children coming onto the internet, showing up on these websites. And these were kids that were not interested in technology. They were forced to be there because of the circumstances. And possibly not coincidentally was the beginning of this era of violence and sextortion. 2021 was really when it got on the radar. There's a lot of overlap between the sextortion and the high dollar fraud. And some people have noticed this. It's starting to become increasingly obvious. So we're going to talk about that on the next slide. And then most recently, I would describe this as the ransomware era, the past couple years. So, the companies have finally started to crack down on SIM swap fraud. And that is a direct cause of the pivot to ransomware. The threat actors that in the comm that are doing ransomware now, they always could do ransomware before, but SimSwap was just so much easier. So that pivot is really related to the SimSwap crackdown.
The SimSwap era is when I started getting caught up on this in my previous job. This was something that was really fascinating to me because I come from a mobile background, and it kind of flipped a switch for me because we were working the case that Allison and I were running parallel on. We're working this case, and what I saw was that kids were getting groomed to go to work at stores to then become SIM swappers from inside the stores. And what was happening was, in one particular case, we had a gang leader in a large city who became a manager inside the store, and he was bringing his gang members in, knowing that he'd have to fire them. And so they're getting caught doing the SIM swap. He'd be like, oh my gosh, fire him. And then he'd call up his next gang member and walk him right through. So here's part of where I started understanding how the grooming was coming into place here.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the comm, but from a sextortion angle. So to be clear here, I want to separate out different categories of sextortion. So there is the financial sextortion, which I'm not talking about today. That stuff is run by adult gangs out of Africa, Southeast Asia, like proper syndicates. They're purely financially motivated. It's not personal for them. They're also very high volume, definitely responsible for some deaths. I'm not talking about them today. What I'm talking about is the non-financial violent sextortion, where in every instance of this, I've never seen them ask for money. And the perpetrators are young and the victims are young. So that said, I'm gonna get into it. So from looking at this stuff over time, I think I would divide sextorters into a few different generations. So the first generation, the actual birth of sextortion, as far as I know it, is from the SimSwap communities, from the comm back when they were doing SimSwap. So these initial groups were kind of the higher end of the SimSwap community in terms of skills, and they realized that they can use these skills for all kinds of purposes. They can use it to enable financial fraud. They can also use it to coerce little girls. So they were using some of these esoteric hacking techniques to do like the first iterations of forcing these girls to self-harm and do the things that these sextortion groups are known for. And they initially got fame within the comm doing this stuff because they think this is cool. And then this next generation of actors came up, and they're like the second generation of sextorters. And that's where the original 764 came in. And there was a ton of copycat groups. I'm not going to name them because they're not worth naming. But this second generation, they're not so technically skilled. And they realize that you can get the same results and better, quote unquote, if you just threaten them. So, that's just what they did. It was like crude threats. And then the next generation after that is probably in the past couple of years. The third generation are really more like physical violence focused. They would use, like as a recruitment technique, they would say, like, if you want to join this group, you have to do this or that depraved act. And so what they would get is basically a bunch of troubled teenagers coming to them, willing to throw away their lives for a little bit of potential internet fame. Not particularly rational, but it's a process that seems to be repeatable. And as this third generation continues to operate, that's where, governments are starting to prioritize it as terrorism, where these kids, like troubled teenager kids, are getting wrapped up in literal terrorism. What I would describe as the fourth generation also is the quote unquote self-described anti-extortion. So specifically the COM-related anti-extortion groups, they were founded by members of the first generation. I believe that they were motivated by almost like a resentment towards the second generation because they were engaging in what they would consider art. And you have all these primitive people coming in and trampling over it. So that's very twisted. I'm not endorsing that. Anyways, so there was resentment between the older generation and their replacements. They decided they're going to switch sides, right? And so a lot of the more recent activity involves a lot of this very chaotic, like self-described vigilante stuff where, if you ever run into it, don't trust any of it for sure. So that brings us to the current day. Law enforcement seems to be treating this stuff as terrorism. They're cracking down. They're arresting a lot of these guys. The turnaround time for arrests of these actors has been very impressive because I'm used to seeing turnaround time for cyber cases, which is like a year if it's really fast. But we're seeing days, weeks. It's getting faster and faster.
Thank you. The only thing I'll say about this is pay attention to online sections. Online gaming, social media, these are where these kids are getting groomed. These are where these kids are going to find acceptance, and these people know it, and they know how to give the acceptance to convince them to get involved in this.
Yeah, basically any place where a child can communicate with another party. Okay, we just got 12 minutes left. I'm going to go fast. All right, so another way to look at the COM is looking at it like a sales funnel, like the structure of the sales funnel, right? The concept of it is you have a larger pool of slightly less interested people, and you're going to guide those people towards making a purchase, right? But you know that every step of the way, you're going to lose a bunch of people, right? So the COM can be thought of as a sales funnel. So if you think of the largest group of people, these are casual participants, people that are not necessarily offending. But you may also have victims in here as well. And then as time goes on, these people hang around in these social spaces and they communicate, they become part of the gang. This is essentially gang initiation, like street gang patterns right here, right? The longer they hang out with these people, they think this behavior is normal. And so that's why you have all these crazy internet communities where they think that sextorting a child is cool. And it's because of this gradual process where they hang out with people, they see that they're glorified and they see the fame, and then they decide, I want to do that. I'm going to participate. And then you end up with people moving down the sales funnel. Now, that said, the bulk of the people quit. They drop out of it. There are a lot of kids growing up that do have a moral compass. So, part of this is bad, but part of it you should also take some, feel good about the fact that most of the kids do drop out of this process. So here's another way to look at the sales funnel. So this is the relative risk posed by individuals when you're looking at the COM. And knowing the structure is important because you need to structure your response. So the first one, this is the bulk of the population. This is the majority. They're also the minority of the risk. Next one, the risk increases as the time spent in the COM continues. And then you see the beginning of offending, and then the risk further increases. And then you have the final stages of the people that really explode with high volume activity. Those are the ones that are the highest risk. So, when we structure a response as an industry, the way that we allocate resources and think about this stuff is we need to focus all of the resources basically on the bottom parts. So another thing is, law enforcement has really stepped up against the comm and these threat actors. These are some statements made in 2022. They made me super mad because I was like, we can actually arrest our way out of it. We should arrest them. And fast forward to this year. Oh, yeah, So fast forward to this year. It turns out that we actually can just throw them all in jail. So straight to jail. So, final thoughts here. We only got 8 minutes. Okay. All right, so the call to action here. There's a couple of points here. Once you understand the structure of the comm, how it works, how the communities and the organization works, there are certain responses that make the most sense. First of all is governments prioritizing high harm comm actors for arrest. There's really not a lot of them. You can throw them in jail. I'm seeing the crackdowns. I think they're very effective. I look at the reactions from the groups and they calm down after they understand that there's consequences to behavior. Another thing that's really important that our industry, private sector, needs to understand is the insider threat risks. So hiring someone that got arrested in the 90s for hacking the Pentagon is very different from hiring someone who got arrested last year for swatting someone's grandma, right? The stereotypes that we have of hackers are just misunderstood computer geniuses and all they need is like a little pat on the back and a hug and they'll be fine. It's very different now. Hiring a comm kid is not the same as hiring a hacker. As we have, the next generation of people applying for jobs, most of them are going to be fine. But for these comm kids that learned really good OSINT skills, you have to ask yourself, what motivated them to learn OSINT skills? Why were they tracking people down when they were 17? Like some of these actors that I have seen involved in early sextortion, they're obsessed with InfoSec as an industry. They're obsessed with OSINT as a practice, as a job. They're absolutely going to apply for jobs. And when you, on your security team, you know how crazy data access that you have as part of your job. You need to think about what kind of accountability structures you're going to have in place for when the next generation applies for a job. We all know that we are trustworthy, right? But the next person that replaces us, are they trustworthy? So part of it is vetting, part of it is accountability structures, right? This is the only way we can move forward as an industry. The other thing too, the third thing is that, the world is, let me go back to the insider threat thing real quick. I want to tell a very quick story. So owner of Breach Forums got arrested, right? There were some interesting social media reactions after that. There were people saying like, oh, he'll do great getting a job. Like he's so charismatic. I like him. But those of us that work comm cases, we saw this foolishness. We kept our mouths shut. Later on, it became public that he got additional charges for an enormous amount of CSAM on his devices. And this is something that, unless you work these cases or you have some kind of understanding of the space, you're not really going to realize that, it's not about the hacking skills, it's about the intentions and the culture that these people are imprinted on, their moral intentions. After his CSAM charges were filed, a lot of the people that were suggesting that he get a job kind of stopped talking about that. And this is one of those things, people need to understand that comm kids are different from old school hackers. Anyways, third item here, call to action. How will this affect platforms and children's access to the internet? There's a big reckoning right now. There's a big debate right now about should children have access to the internet? Is it good for them? Is it bad for them? And sometimes people have talked to me about like, how does, the comm exists, children should be banned from the internet. But like the problem is the comm, the really high harm actors are like a few hundred or maybe a few thousand people tops in like the whole population. So, simple blanket bans are not going to stop victimization if children are allowed to communicate at all. And I mean, hopefully we don't just ban all child communication, right? Like there's going to be a way for people to talk to each other. And if we don't understand how the comm works, we will not stop victimization, no matter what kind of blanket bans get put on different parts of the internet. So I encourage everyone to understand more about how the comm works, what motivates these people, and what kind of responses will be effective.
And a couple of things just to close this out. So when I was working the swatting case with my team, there were a couple of things that really stuck out to me. One was in one of the live streams that we were witnessing, there was clearly somebody who was grooming this 14-year-old kid as the SWAT was going on. He was telling him, go say this, go do this. What happened later on as these SWATs went along, and I can talk about a few of them you saw in Richmond. I'll tell you right now, one of the other ones was Sandy Hook. And that one got me. To have the nerve to call up Sandy Hook after what took place there, that hit home with me. Now, the last thing that I'll tell you about this was before it all stopped, the kid had decided, I'm assuming he's a kid, we're pretty confident, he's about 14, had decided, I'm going to make money off of this. He was charging $3 a SWAT. $3 a SWAT. That's what he posted. I'll leave you with that.
Thank you. Do we have 2 minutes for questions? Okay. Yes.
Do you see a demographic in terms of who is targeted, and has the demographic changed over time, or maybe you're seeing areas with rates of lower education being higher targeting grounds?
I'm not sure education levels the question is like, in terms of demographic targeting, is there a difference in education levels? Does that factor? So for the underage targeting, I'm not sure if education levels can even be determined because they're not even old enough to go to college. Oh, parents' education levels. That's a really good question. I have a lot of questions about the parents in general. I would love to know. Let me know if any of you find out.
We might have to save that for when we're all at a bar thinking about this through. Anybody else?
Right here.
We can also answer questions after the talk.
Here you go. How do you interrupt the funnel? Basically.
Yeah, there's a lot of strategies for that, actually. Okay, I got 1.5 minutes. All right, so one thing.
Take your time.
Okay. So one thing that really did a lot to interrupt the funnel years ago, actually, was the introduction of bug bounties, one, and the professionalization of our industry, two. Probably the other way around in terms of like how many people that impacted. But anyway, years ago, when InfoSec finally became a profession and people got paid to do this job, rather than, random people just trying to report a security issue and not getting anywhere, right? That sucked a lot of talent out of the underground, where basically, productive avenues of hacking are legalized. And, legalizing legitimate behavior did a lot to take things out of the criminal spaces. Bug bounty programs also, I saw specific criminal actors that I used to track get into bug bounty programs, and then they would stop doing things that would make me track them, which is cool, right? I love to see it. And, fast forward to today, a lot of the reason why people get involved in the comm, young kids, they're making a rational financial decision. You know, a lot of them, after they get arrested, they blame mental illness, whatever. I don't believe that. I believe that the majority of them are making a rational financial decision. They realize that given the current economic state of things, as an 18-year-old trying to get an entry-level job, you're going to make garbage money. You're going to have 10 roommates. You know, or you can get into fraud, make way more money, right? And they think that it's cooler too, right? So a lot of these guys, they're making a rational economic decision to choose fraud as a career. So we need to think about, you know, given these motivations, what is the career path for the average 18-year-old? Why does it suck so much to apply for a job? Why is it that when you submit your resume to LinkedIn, you don't get any responses to any of the jobs that you apply for? You know, all these difficulties that we all have in applying for jobs, kids experience that tenfold. And so we need to think about the career path. We can cut down on the sheer numbers a lot.
Last thing I'll tell you about this is during this whole swatting investigation, we did actually get law enforcement to step in on one of them, and I got to hear the threat actor that was on the phone go, "Oh my God, I'm cooked." That made me feel good.
Yeah, so we got to do a combination of carrot and stick here. We'll be available to talk afterwards. Oh, one last question.
What platform is most of this happening?
What platform is most of this happening on? That's a very good question. That's actually a really important point. So the core of a lot of this activity are happening on websites that are independently owned and operated by bad actors. A lot of that will leak out onto commercial platforms, commercial social media. And, you know, a lot of these companies are getting heat for this right now. But this is actually a second order effect of what's actually happening here. What's actually happening here is a social phenomenon where children are willfully joining violent street gangs on the internet. And that's what we need to address.